48 hours ago, the world watched Mark Carney walk out of the White House. He boarded a plane. He flew back to Ottawa. He said 9 words that shook the global economy. You can't tariff gravity, and you can't sanction geography. Most people assumed that was the climax. Most people assumed cooler heads would prevail, that someone in Washington would pick up the phone, that someone in Ottawa would extend an olive branch, that the adults in the room would quietly stitch the wound before the bleeding reached Main Street. They were wrong. Because what happened in the last 24 hours didn't de-escalate. It detonated. And what you are watching now is not a trade dispute. It is not a diplomatic spat. It is the unraveling of the most integrated economic partnership on the planet in real time, with no one at the wheel. Because early this morning at 6:47 a.m. Eastern, the Treasury Department issued an emergency executive action. Not a tariff, not a quota, something far more dangerous. The United States government froze $12 billion in Canadian sovereign assets held in American financial institutions. Government bonds, reserve accounts, infrastructure investment vehicles, frozen, locked, inaccessible. No phone call to Ottawa beforehand. No warning through diplomatic channels. No consultation with the Federal Reserve. Just a one-page order, signed by the President, with a single justification line that read, "In response to Canada's refusal to negotiate in good faith under the USMCA framework, these measures are necessary to protect American economic security." Let that sink in. The United States just seized financial assets belonging to Canada. Not Iran, not Russia, not North Korea. Canada. The country that has fought alongside America in every major conflict since World War I. The country that took in stranded American passengers on September 11th. The country whose border has been undefended for over a century. That country just had its money frozen by its closest ally. And if you think that sounds like an overreaction, you're right. That's exactly what it is. But Donald Trump is not operating on reason right now. He is operating on rage. Because Carney's walkout didn't just embarrass him politically, it humiliated him on the world stage. Every major newspaper from Tokyo to Berlin ran the same photograph. The empty podium in the Rose Garden, the unsigned document, the pen sitting untouched on the table. That image became a symbol overnight. A symbol that America's leverage has limits, that the bully pulpit has a ceiling, and Trump cannot tolerate symbols that make him look weak. So he escalated, not with strategy, not with calculation, with impulse. And now the consequences of that impulse are cascading through every artery of the North American economy, and they are moving faster than anyone in the West Wing anticipated. Here's what happened in the hours after the asset freeze was announced. First, the Canadian dollar didn't crash. It should have. Every textbook says when a country's sovereign assets are frozen by the world's largest economy, its currency collapses. Investors flee. Capital evaporates. But that is not what happened. The Canadian dollar dipped for 90 minutes, then stabilized, then began climbing. Why? Because within 2 hours of the freeze, 3 things occurred almost simultaneously. The European Central Bank issued a statement, unusual, blunt, and unmistakable, expressing, quote, deep concern over the unilateral weaponization of financial instruments against a NATO ally and G7 partner. That language matters. Central banks do not use words like weaponization casually. That word was chosen. It was a signal to global markets. Europe sees what Trump is doing, and Europe is not okay with it. Second, the Bank of Japan quietly extended a $15 billion currency swap line to the Bank of Canada. Not announced in a press conference, not tweeted, just a line item in a financial filing, spotted by analysts at 8 a.m. Tokyo time. Japan was telling Canada, you have a lifeline. You are not alone. And more importantly, Japan was telling Trump, you are not the only game in town anymore. Third, and this is the one that sent shockwaves through Washington, Germany's finance minister held an unscheduled call with Mark Carney. The call lasted 40 minutes, and within an hour of it ending, Berlin announced the acceleration of a critical minerals partnership with Canada that had been in negotiation for over a year. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths, the materials that power every electric vehicle, every semiconductor, every defense system in the Western world. Germany just locked in long-term supply agreements with Ottawa, not Washington. Ottawa, do you see what is happening? Trump froze Canadian assets, expecting Carney to panic, expecting him to call, expecting him to beg, Instead, the rest of the world stepped in. And every country that stepped in sent the same message. If America is going to treat its allies like enemies, then America's allies will start building systems that don't need America. That is the moment the ground shifted. Not because of what Trump did, but because of what everyone else did in response. And Mark Carney, quiet, calculating, methodical Mark Carney, was ready for all of it. Because he didn't just walk out of the White House 2 days ago. He walked out with a plan. And today we saw that plan begin to execute. At 2 p.m. Ottawa time, Mark Carney stood at a podium in the House of Commons. No American flags behind him. No talk of friendship. No appeals to the special relationship. Just a Canadian flag, a maple leaf, and a man who looked like he had not slept but had absolutely no intention of backing down. He spoke for 11 minutes. No notes. No teleprompter. And what he said was, by any measure, the most consequential economic policy speech delivered by a Canadian Prime Minister in modern history. He began calmly, almost too calmly. He said, Canada did not seek this confrontation. He said Canada had entered the USMCA review in good faith, with a mandate to modernize the agreement, not to destroy it. He said Canada had offered concessions, real ones, on digital trade provisions, on intellectual property timelines, on pharmaceutical patent harmonization. He listed them, one by one, methodically, the way a prosecutor lays out evidence. And then his tone changed. Not louder, colder. He said, what we received in return was not a negotiation. It was a demand for capitulation. We were told to surrender sovereignty over our Arctic waters. We were told to dismantle agricultural systems that have sustained rural communities for generations. We were told to accept a framework in which our entire trade relationship could be canceled every 12 months at the whim of a single foreign leader. That is not partnership. That is subjugation. And Canada does not submit. The chamber erupted. And I don't mean polite parliamentary applause. I mean every party, Conservative, NDP, Bloc, stood. Because in that moment, this stopped being about Carney's politics. It became about sovereignty. And Carney understood that. He had turned a trade dispute into a question of national identity. And once a country frames something as identity, retreat becomes impossible. But Carney didn't stop there. Because what came next was not rhetoric. It was policy. And it was devastating. He announced 3 measures. Each one was a calculated strike aimed not at the American people, but at the pressure points of the American political system. And each one was designed to make Trump's position more painful with every passing day. Measure 1. Canada would immediately impose a 25% export surcharge on all energy products flowing to the United States. Not a ban, not an embargo, a surcharge. Crude oil, natural gas, hydroelectric power, uranium. All of it. Effective in 72 hours. He explained it simply. He said, if the United States believes Canadian goods should be taxed at the border, then Canada will ensure Canadian resources are priced accordingly at the source. The math on this is brutal. Canada supplies roughly 60% of America's imported oil. The majority of that is heavy crude, the specific grade that U.S. Gulf Coast refineries are engineered to process. You cannot substitute it easily. You cannot replace it with domestic shale. The refineries are physically built for Canadian bitumen. A 25% surcharge on that supply translates directly into higher gasoline prices. Not in 6 months. Not after some complex economic chain reaction. Within days. Analysts at Goldman Sachs released an emergency note within an hour of Carney's speech. Their estimate, if the surcharge holds for 30 days, average U.S. gasoline prices rise by 40 to 65 cents per gallon. In some Midwestern states that depend almost entirely on Canadian crude, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, the spike could exceed $1 more per gallon. In swing states, 5 months before midterm campaign season heats up. That is not an accident. That is a scalpel. Carney is not trying to hurt America. He is trying to hurt Trump's coalition. And he is doing it with a surgeon's precision that makes Trump's blunt tariff threats look like a child swinging a hammer. Measure 2. Canada would immediately invoke Article 32.10 of the USMCA, the dispute resolution mechanism, and simultaneously file a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization, alleging that the United States asset freeze constitutes an illegal expropriation under international law. Now, most people hear WTO filing, and their eyes glaze over. It sounds bureaucratic, it sounds slow, it sounds irrelevant. But Carney is not filing because he expects the WTO to save him. He is filing because it creates a legal record. It creates a framework that other countries can join. It turns this from a bilateral spat into a multilateral case. And it puts the United States on the wrong side of international trade law at precisely the moment when Washington is trying to recruit allies for its confrontation with China. Think about that irony. Trump wants Europe and Asia to stand with America against Beijing. But he is simultaneously demonstrating to those very same countries that America will freeze your assets, tear up agreements, and impose unilateral demands if you don't comply. Why would Japan trust a security guarantee from a country that just seized Canada's money? Why would Germany join an economic coalition led by a nation that treats trade deals like disposable napkins? Carney sees that contradiction, and he is exploiting it ruthlessly. Every filing, every legal brief, every international statement is designed to widen the gap between Trump and the rest of the democratic world. Carney is not just fighting for Canada. He is making Trump fight on every front simultaneously. Measure 3. And this is the one that nobody saw coming. This is the one that landed like a depth charge in Washington and is still reverberating through the Pentagon, the State Department, and every think tank on Massachusetts Avenue. Carney announced that Canada would begin an immediate strategic review of all defense procurement contracts with U.S.-based firms. Canada spends roughly $25 billion a year on defense. A significant portion of that flows to American defense contractors: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, fighter jets, naval vessels, surveillance systems, communications infrastructure. Carney didn't cancel any contracts. He didn't need to. He simply said the word review. And in the defense industry, review is a grenade. Because defense contracts operate on long timelines, they depend on certainty. They depend on the assumption that allied nations will continue to buy from each other. When a country announces a strategic review, it signals to every contractor that future orders are uncertain. Stock prices move, lobbyists activate, congressional offices in districts where those weapons are built start receiving very uncomfortable phone calls. Within 3 hours of Carney's speech, Lockheed Martin stock dropped 4.2%. Raytheon dropped 3.8%. General Dynamics dropped 5.1%. Those are not catastrophic numbers, but they are attention-getting numbers. They're the kind of numbers that make defense CEOs pick up the phone and call the White House. And what they say on that call is simple: fix this now. Because if Canada shifts procurement to European or Asian suppliers, those contracts don't come back, ever. Carney just turned America's defense industry into a lobbying force against Trump's own trade policy. That is not emotion. That is chess. And Trump, for all his bluster, does not play chess. He plays poker, and in poker, you can bluff. In chess, every move is visible. Every consequence is calculable. And right now, Carney is 3 moves ahead. So what is Trump doing? What is the White House response to this cascade of consequences? And here's where the picture gets truly alarming. Because the answer, based on everything coming out of Washington in the last 12 hours, is they don't have one. There is no unified strategy. There is no coordinated response. There are factions. And those factions are at war with each other inside the West Wing. On one side, you have the economic nationalists, the people who believe tariffs are always good, that pain is always temporary, that America can outlast anyone in a trade war because America's bigger. These are the people who told Trump to issue the ultimatum in the first place. They are doubling down. They want more tariffs, they want the border shut, they want Canada punished. On the other side, you have the pragmatists, the Treasury officials, the trade advisors, the people who actually read the economic data, and they are terrified because the data is already moving in the wrong direction. U.S. auto manufacturers have issued emergency warnings. Ford announced this afternoon that it is suspending production at 2 plants, one in Michigan, one in Kentucky, due to parts shortages caused by border slowdowns. General Motors is expected to follow within 48 hours. Toyota's San Antonio plant, which depends on Canadian-sourced aluminum, has reduced shifts. These are not projections. These are not forecasts. These are things happening right now, today, in real factories, to real workers. And every one of those workers lives in a state that Trump needs. Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, Texas. The political geography of this crisis is a nightmare for the Republican Party, and they know it. Behind closed doors, Senate Republicans are reportedly furious. Not publicly, they won't say it on camera, but aides describe a mood of controlled panic. They see the gas price projections, they see the plant closures, they see the defense stocks falling. And they see a president who appears to have no off-ramp, because Trump has made this personal. He has framed Carney as an enemy. He has framed Canada as ungrateful. And once you frame a conflict in personal terms, retreat becomes humiliation. And Trump does not do humiliation, which means we are now in the most dangerous phase of this crisis. The phase where the rational move is to de-escalate, but the political incentives push toward escalation. The phase where pride overrides arithmetic. The phase where a man who cannot admit mistakes is surrounded by consequences he cannot control. And Carney? Carney is doing something extraordinary. He is doing nothing. He is not tweeting. He is not giving interviews. He is not escalating. He made his 3 moves. He stated his position. And now he is waiting, because Carney understands the most powerful principle in any negotiation. When your opponent is destroying himself, do not interrupt. Every hour that passes, the pressure inside the United States builds. Every gas station price update, every plant closure announcement, every stock dip, every angry call from a CEO to a senator. All of it builds pressure not on Ottawa, but on Washington. Carney has turned time itself into a weapon, and he has the patience to let it work. So here is where we stand. The USMCA is functionally dead. Canadian assets are frozen in American banks. Energy surcharges are 48 hours from activation. Defense contracts are under review. Auto plants are closing. Gas prices are rising. Markets are volatile. And the 2 leaders at the center of this crisis could not be more different in how they operate. One governs by impulse. The other governs by systems. One needs the crowd. The other needs the math. One escalates because he doesn't know how to stop. The other waits because he knows that stopping is sometimes the most aggressive thing you can do. And the rest of the world is watching. Not just watching. Choosing. Choosing whether to stand with a superpower that weaponizes alliances or with a middle power that plays by the rules and holds its ground. That choice, multiplied across dozens of nations, is the real consequence of this crisis. Not the tariffs, not the asset freeze. The realignment, because what Trump has done in the last 48 hours is not just threaten Canada. He has shown every country on earth what it looks like when America turns on its best friend. And if America will do this to Canada, then no alliance is safe. No agreement is permanent. No handshake means anything. That is the legacy being written right now. Not in policy papers or trade documents. In the quiet calculations happening in ministries in Berlin, in Tokyo, in Canberra, in Seoul. The calculation that says, maybe we need a world that doesn't depend on Washington. Maybe that world is already here. Mark Carney didn't just walk out of the White House. He walked into history. And Donald Trump, the man who said he alone could fix it, is discovering that some things, once broken, cannot be fixed by one man, especially when that man is the one who broke them. The next 72 hours will decide whether this becomes the worst trade crisis since Smoot-Hawley, or the moment that reshapes the global order for a generation. Either way, the old North America, the one built on trust, integration, and the assumption that the border would always stay open, that North America is gone. And what replaces it will be defined not by who shouted loudest, but by who understood the game. History is accelerating. And right now, the only person who looks like he read the manual is the quiet Canadian who said 9 words and walked away.